Mark Rogers TV on college football, and before we dive into the current BCS mess, as we've stated many times, the BCS does not work, and we've posted many videos explaining exactly why it doesn't work and why the 14 playoff will be just a smidge better, just a bit better, giving a selection to two other teams to compete for a national championship. In addition, not only is it ridiculous to select teams in this fashion, the thing we need to take into consideration is that we're looking at right now, Alabama, Oregon, Florida State, Ohio State, and Baylor are undefeated. Not only have those teams not played one another, but those teams have not played anybody who's played a common opponent except for Tennessee. Alabama played Tennessee, Oregon played Tennessee. They both crushed Tennessee. And the Volunteers are about the 9th or 10th, 11th best team in the SEC. So that really didn't prove a whole lot. So not only do you have a system in which teams are compared based on style points, but they don't even play each other, nor do they even play teams that play one another. So it's even ridiculous to that point. So not only do we need a playoff, what we need is an NFL-type scheduling system. So, for example, if you win the SEC in 2013, in 2014, your non-conference games are determined for you by a mathematical formula set up that you play, let's say, one team from each of the other four major conferences, and they're pre-selected. The first place team last season from the Big 12, the fourth place team from the Big 10, whatever it is, an NFL-type scheduling system which ensures good teams play good teams the next season, and it's equitable. It can't be perfect. It will never be perfect. The best team in the Big 12 last season could drop to fifth, whatever, but at least it's very fair. And teams aren't just running out there trying to schedule games with their own interests in mind, but it's for the better good, and it's to determine a champion and equal things out. Again, we've got Alabama, Oregon, Florida State, Ohio State, and Baylor all undefeated. Not even mentioning the two other undefeated teams who play FBS football. And no, in no way, I don't want to hear any comments come back to me that Northern Illinois and Fresno State are not worthy and that I'm ridiculous in stating anything there. I'm not saying that they're nearly as good as these other teams. I'm just saying that they play FBS football. Therefore, they need to be treated equally, or they need to be extracted and separated and sent to another division to compete for a championship. One or the other. Treat them equally, or separate the lower tier conferences like the MAC and the Sun Belt and the Mountain West and let them play a championship. Okay. In addition to the 5 undefeated teams, we also have 10 teams with one loss from the major conferences. Auburn, Mizzou, Stanford, Michigan State, Louisville, Houston, Central Florida, Oklahoma State, Clemson, and Miami. Okay, let's get back to the so-called contenders and what they did today and what they've got coming up. Okay, most of them didn't play. Alabama bye this week. LSU, huge game for the Tide, of course, next week. They've got to win that game, or maybe they don't have to win that game. What if Alabama lost to LSU and they had one loss? Then they knocked out Auburn, who at that point would be maybe the 6th or 7th ranked team in the country. And then Alabama beat a one-loss Mizzou team in the SEC championship game and won the SEC. Do you not think that there would be an agenda out there, and maybe rightfully so, that the SEC champion with one loss, going through the gauntlet that Alabama would, LSU, Auburn, and an SEC championship game against a top 10 team, that an SEC team should get the nod to play in the national championship game? What if Alabama finished with one loss and Oregon and Florida State went undefeated? Who should get in? Just throwing it out there. Okay, for Oregon, they had the bye today. They, of course, play Stanford on Thursday. We know the talk about Oregon's schedule versus Florida State. Florida State may momentarily move into second place in the BCS coming up when the standings are released on Sunday. However, that's supposed to be short-lived. As long as Oregon holds serve and wins out, they've got a much tougher schedule overall, with Stanford coming up, Oregon State. Even the date against Utah is decent. A game at Arizona, which Some analysts out there think that that's going to be a difficult game, possibly for the Ducks. I don't think so. And then the Pac-12 championship game against a fringe top 25 team, possibly UCLA, most likely, but USC, Arizona State, and Arizona are certainly possibilities for the Pac-12 championship game. So Oregon's got a lot of one very difficult game at Stanford, and then 3 or 4 somewhat difficult games against that other competition. For Florida State, they've played possibly the 2 most impressive games against quality foes this season. The Miami game tonight, 41-14. Jameis Winston with 2 picks early, but played very well. The running game was dominant. The defense was dominant against Stephen Morris. Miami ran the ball, specifically in the first quarter. The Miami offensive line and Duke Johnson played very well early, but Florida State's defense was too much in this football game. Many people would think Florida State, if you take the names off the jerseys, not the personal names, but the team names off these teams, and just went by performance in 2013, that Florida State might have the most impressive team. Again, probably the 2 most impressive victories by any team in the nation over 2 quality foes, 2 top 10 foes in Miami, again, 41-14, and against Clemson, 51-14. Florida State, that's pretty much the statement game for them against Miami. And then they've got the game against Florida, which is becoming less and less important and less impressive should the Noles go ahead and take care of business against the Gators, who are now 4-4. We know that Florida has top-notch talent, but just not coming together this season, and injuries all over the place. The Gators at 4-4. And the ACC championship game against probably Miami again. So Florida State would really not be proving a point in defeating Miami again, unless they steamrolled Miami again, and Miami only had 1 loss and came into the game an 11-1 football team, top 10, and Florida State rolled them again. That would prove something to a certain extent, but possibly Miami would play a closer game, as is typically the case when there's a rematch in there. Then you've got Ohio State, who's really behind the 8 ball. We know the deal with the Big Ten, the perception of the Big Ten, which I believe to be partial reality. The Big Ten has not played well in recent seasons, and specifically this year. But if you look at each conference and take the quality wins of each conference and the overall record against the other BCS conferences, the Big Ten really hasn't played that poorly. Regardless, what really hurts Ohio State here is not playing Michigan State, who at this point is 8-1, not on Ohio State's schedule, although they could play the Buckeyes in the Big Ten championship game, and not playing Nebraska. And despite the issues Nebraska's had against Minnesota and UCLA, it's still a 6-2 football team ranked in the top 30 in the country, and that would help the Buckeyes. But no Nebraska, no Michigan State on the schedule. Okay, so really 2 games that the Buckeyes should win easily the next couple of weeks against Illinois and Indiana. The game against Michigan, not necessarily that impressive. The Wolverines should drop out of the top 25 with the loss against Michigan State today. They're now 6-2, but the Wolverines could show up at 9-2 and back in the rankings. But they still have some difficult games against Nebraska and some other teams in the next few weeks. But Ohio State could make the statement against Michigan, although that wouldn't be much of a statement at this point, again, with the Wolverines playing at the pace that they are. But Michigan State, that Ohio State is really rooting for the Spartans to close out the season with 1 loss, get to the Big Ten championship game, an 11-1 football team. They could be at that point ranked in the top 8 to 10 in the country. And for Baylor, welcome Baylor to the 2013 football season. You're finally in it. You're finally playing somebody. Baylor's toughest game to date, Kansas State. Kansas State 3-4. All right. But it finally starts here for Baylor. They take on Oklahoma. They've got Texas Tech. They're at Oklahoma State, and they're taking on TCU in Texas. So that's 4 out of 5 difficult games. Again, Baylor not playing anybody exceptional, but those are 4 quality teams. Especially, I really want to see them play Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Texas, and Baylor needs to show us something there. So at this point, Baylor is dead to me until they step on the field against Oklahoma, because the 7-0 is really really inconsequential to this point, other than it putting them in position now to go ahead and play some decent teams and get the job done. Then look at all the one-loss teams. And the one-loss team, really there's two. There are two one-loss teams that really have it right there for the taking. Now I'm going to go with three one-loss teams. That would be Auburn and Missouri, by virtue of playing in the SEC, perceived as the best league and most likely the best league. Auburn obviously still has the date with Alabama. They need to take care of Georgia and Tennessee. Those could be difficult games. Auburn's got Alabama. Now, if Auburn finishes the season defeating the number one team, the defending national champion, then goes to the SEC championship game, and let's say defeats a one-loss Missouri team that's ranked in the top 5 or 6, that would be difficult to turn down the Tigers. Same thing with Mizzou. They clear through the schedule. They defeat Texas A&M and Ole Miss, two quality football teams, especially the Aggies pushing the top 10. Mizzou wins the SEC championship game against Alabama. They only have one loss, and they're probably in the top 5 going into that game. How do you leave Mizzou out? Because you've got to treat Auburn and Missouri in that situation the same way that you would treat Alabama. You would have to. They would have run through the same or a similar SEC schedule and a similar non-conference schedule, and they won the SEC. Let's forget what happened in 2012 and before in giving Alabama a free pass. You would have to treat Missouri and Auburn the same way as a one-loss SEC champion. Okay, and then the other team that has a clearer shot than the other one-loss teams to possibly get there, and that's, of course, Stanford, who would get Oregon out of their way automatically by defeating the Ducks at home on Thursday. Stanford's got the difficult schedule, playing in the Pac-12, rated as the second best conference in college football, would get the Pac-12 championship game against another decent opponent, possibly UCLA. And so Stanford's got the possibility there. Just again, got to mention these other one-loss teams, and it just being a complete farce that these teams have no chance of winning a national championship in Michigan State, Louisville, Houston, Central Florida, Oklahoma State, Clemson, and Miami, especially those teams that play in the power conferences. So that's how I see it right now. I see Alabama with a clear path, of course, to the national championship, and Oregon with the other clear path to the national championship. Their strength of schedule will keep them in the 2 spot. If things slip up, of course, Florida State's right there. What I would like to see happen is 2 of the so-called name teams, meaning right at this point it would be Florida State and Ohio State. And why not toss Baylor in there? Everybody runs the table, and you're leaving 2 or 3 undefeated teams out in the cold. That would really lay waste to this system, although we've seen it countless times. All right, that's the BCS rundown for right now on Mark Rogers TV. And now I invite you to give us your thoughts on the BCS and the rest of the college football schedule here in 2013.